Well, greetings. We are delighted to have Radhika Papandreou with Korn Ferry with us today. Radhika is the managing partner for Korn Ferry at the Chicago office. She's responsible for the Chicago office. She also oversees the practice for hospitality, travel, and related industries for Korn Ferry in North America. A delight to have you, Radhika.
Thank you, David. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Radhika, you've been in executive search for a while now. I've known you for a while, but you haven't always been in executive search. In fact, your degrees are in finance and accounting, and you used to be in banking. So this is quite a change for you to be in executive search. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the things that you learned along the way?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, David. And thanks again for having me. You've been a client and a candidate of mine, but also a very good friend. So I'm really excited to be here today. I was in banking for the first 18 years of my career. I was a corporate banker. I grew up at Citigroup. I was there for over 10 years learning the business. I then made a couple of stops at different foreign banks in the US, working out of New York. And I was lucky enough to have a coach that recognized that I was probably looking for something different than I was doing. And she suggested search for me. She had happened to join an executive search firm here in Chicago, and she was building out their leadership consulting practice and said that I should speak to the founder. I was lucky enough to start search at a boutique firm here in Chicago with the founder who took a chance on me. I had never done search. And my first assignment, I always like to say, was in 2016. And it was when Park Hotels was spinning out of Hilton. And my former firm was actually asked to build out that board. So you can imagine never doing search before and then working with the founder to really execute on a very high profile assignment. So he threw me in the deep end and luckily I swam. So I worked on that project and then started doing a lot more board work and C-suite work within the broader hospitality sector. And I was asked to step up to lead the practice over time. And then a couple of years later, Korn Ferry came calling. We had a great leader of our travel, hospitality, and leisure practice that actually wanted to retire and pursue hobbies, which not all of us do, but he really wanted to do that. So he was looking for a successor. And so I came over to Korn Ferry right at the beginning of 2019 and was in the role for about 6 months when the crisis happened with COVID. So it was a very interesting time to be a new partner at a very large firm leading one of the most hard-hit industries, but we figured it out as a team here. And during COVID, our head of Chicago asked to step down. He had been in role for over 17 years and was ready for a change. And the firm asked me to step in and lead the Chicago office, which has been really symbiotic with my day job in executive search, because I'm really feeling real time what a lot of executives are going through in terms of return to work strategies, engaging the employee population, figuring out how to create community in our new world. So I'm doing that at my job. And then I'm also helping advise my clients around that. So it's been quite a journey for sure.
It's been a spectacular journey. I've just been constantly amazed at how many engagements you're winning and what a great reputation you have in the industry. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Now, I know you've always been an outstanding advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you often speak on the topic at industry shows, and you've done some work with the American Hotel Lodging Association. Can you elaborate on the work that you're doing with HLA?
Absolutely. And I will say wholeheartedly, this is not my work. It is just the relationship that I have with the HLA, but I brought in a very large team at Korn Ferry who actually sit in our org strategy and culture side of the business, so not executive search. And we have been working with the AHLA Foundation to really put a roadmap together for the entire industry around how do you implement best practices around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it started with the diagnostic of the industry. We did a lot of listening sessions, really started getting feedback on what was going on in our space. And then we started creating content and learning around that, virtual as well as in person. So we had our first learning cohort go down in New Orleans about 2 months ago, where we had 6 facilitators from our Korn Ferry's organizational strategy group facilitate conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what was really neat about that, we had not only owners, we had brands, we had management companies, we had vendors to industry as well. So it really was the whole ecosystem in the hotel space that participated. So there were a lot of interesting and diverse points of view. And we will continue to work with the foundation over the next couple of years to continue to put this roadmap and strategy in place and facilitate those discussions.
Well, sounds like a very holistic and comprehensive plan involving a lot of people, very inclusive. Well, that sounds great. Well, in your line of work, I know you see a lot of key trends in our industry. Would you mind to share some of the observations that you've made?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in a really unique time in the industry. I think people listening to this are going to be able to relate to sort of the tight labor market that we're in, not only sort of at entry level positions, but all the way into the C-suite. So we like to say it's a candidate driven market today, and that continues to be the case. Now, I do think with some of the headwinds we're seeing from a macroeconomic perspective, that is going to change a bit. Search is always a lead indicator of these things. So it'll be interesting to see when that starts sort of dipping a bit. My guess is a lot of the work that we are doing has been budgeted for 2022. So my sense is in early 2023, it might slow down a little bit just because of the headwinds we're seeing.
Have you seen any indications that, this looming recession or high inflation is having an impact on the search business?
It hasn't quite yet. This is sort of a guess, and I think it will. We're still continuing to see work come in. People are still investing in people. And, it continues to be a really tough labor market to recruit. So when we're recruiting, even at the C-suite, and that's sort of where I focus, we will have a lot of candidates sort of go through the pipeline before we really find our final candidate. And why is that? People are getting countered very frequently. And people like to stay when they get countered. And we can maybe talk a little bit about that phenomenon. But there's a lot of counter offers happening and people dropping out of processes for various different reasons, including, job prospects within their own organization increasing. So we also have to retain people. So we have sort of two sides. And for talent, we're willing to invest as an industry, right? And so it's hard to pull really great talent out because people are willing to pay up at this point in time.
Right. Now, let's talk about work at home versus hybrid versus returning to work full time. What are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing a huge sort of cluster around hybrid work. So either 3 days a week, 2 days a week, not 5 days for sure. So we're not seeing fully return to work. And we're not really seeing fully remote. Our industry is unique too, because we depend on people showing up for work every day to service our customers. And so it's very hard then for corporate organizations within our space to say, well, guest services is still important and you need to show up, but guess what? We can be hybrid. So I think that we are more sensitive to that as an industry than other industries. But hybrid is sort of where we're seeing this shake out for now, 3 days a week.
Right. Well, this whole work at home hybrid kind of arrangement evolved as a result of the pandemic. And just wondering, a lot of companies offer that actually as a way to recruit people and retain people. But what are you seeing? What are some of the creative things companies are doing to retain their talent?
Yeah. So there's just been a huge investment in human capital, right? So leadership development opportunities for high potential employees. We do that work, right? I have a very large client of ours came in and said, we want to assess all of our hypos and not at the C level, but sort of -1. So they're SVP level. And we want to assess and then put a leadership development plan against this assessment. And this isn't for succession planning necessarily. It's around how do we invest in our people and make them better. And we're seeing these employees really lean into the services that their companies are giving them. So we're doing a lot of work around leadership development. the reality is they're getting calls. Talent is, by people like me and all my formidable competitors. And in order to retain, you have to make sure that you're paying attention to their development. You have to make sure that they're being paid market. And there's just a lot more data out there for employees to see. And so they really understand their market value as well, more so than we've seen ever, right? In terms of just sort of pay equity and how, we look at compensation from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, right? So there's more transparency in compensation. So you need to be paying people right. You need to be developing people. You need to be doing the right things in order to keep your people these days.
I know a lot of companies are talking about DEI, and they set DEI goals, they set ESG goals, and how does that translate into what they are recruiting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for Korn Ferry, every one of our searches, we require a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. So even if our clients aren't requiring it, we hold ourselves to bringing a very balanced and diverse slate of candidates. So we will never bring a slate without diversity on it, because that's sort of our ethos, but our clients are also demanding it. I think where there are pockets where it is easier to get a diverse pool of candidates, different functions, for example, have historically had more diversity. We encourage our clients to really look at the diverse slate, because you really want to make sure that when all is said and done and changes have been made, that your top team is diverse. Because if your top team is not diverse, and you know this very well, then the rest of the organization doesn't see themselves sitting at the top team. And it's hard to retain the people that are ambitious and want to look up to people that look like them. And DE&I, if you look at sort of our solution set across Korn Ferry, which is search as well as a very large advisory business, DE&I goes across the piece and ESG goes across the piece. We don't silo those solutions in any one section of what Korn Ferry does. It's sort of part of every single business that we have.
Sounds like Korn Ferry really gets it. Applaud you for your efforts. That's wonderful to hear. Now, you do primarily C-suite position recruitment, and just wondering if you can share some insight. If you had to fill in this blank, the strongest C-suite candidates possess these attributes.
Yeah, I thought about this question. I think one thing that is become more, I would say more in the forefront than we have seen in the past, is empathy. You have to be an empathetic leader. And I think you have to really understand what your employees are feeling and thinking and going through in order to be able to lead effectively, especially post the COVID crisis. I think that really sort of moved that pendulum towards empathy in a very, very significant way. And we absolutely look for empathy as a trait in a leader, whereas it not necessarily was the case before COVID and years ago. So that's definitely number one. Agility is really important. I think we saw with change and how much change has happened, and how quickly not only technology has changed our industry, but how the crisis has changed our industry. You have to have agility as a leader to really get through times like this. And we are doing a look back where leaders didn't step up to that sort of task, that unsaid task of agility and empathy. And we have been getting work to replace some of these leaders going forward. Yes, we're getting through the COVID crisis and we're moving to the future, but it's going to be something else, right? 3 to 5 years from now. So we need leaders that are prepared to deal with change. So we're seeing a lot more of emphasis on that as we're evaluating candidates in all functions in the C-suite.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Those are probably the most important attributes, especially given what we've been through with the pandemic. If you didn't have agility and you didn't have empathy, it would have been hard to make it.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's talk about your favorite interview questions, plural questions, especially when you're probing for agility and empathy. What are your favorite questions?
Yeah, so I tend to really walk through somebody's journey. So starting from where they grew up and walk through their career path. And it's not so much questions, but it's give me examples of. Give me an example when, change was imminent and how did you handle it? So I like to really watch sort of that problem solving skill set that executives have and how they approach difficult situations or new situations or complex situations. So I really conduct interviews through example. There are a lot of executive recruiters out there. Everybody has a different style. Mine is to get the story and I lead. So I want my candidate to narrate their story to me, and I will ask probing questions and I'll ask for examples, and then I'll be able to highlight that agility piece or that empathy piece through concrete examples that the candidates have given me. And it could be very recently, or it could be examples from the past, right? Because some of those traits are innate and they come out in different ways through your career. And so, how have they evolved is also something that we look at, right?
That's great. And it's interesting to see your approach to interviews. And if you were to make recommendations to someone who is preparing for interviews, what would you say to them? What are some of the things they have to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, I always say this about recruiting. I didn't know a lot about executive recruiting until I went into executive recruiting. So I have sort of my 101 in terms of how you sort of interact with people like me. So firstly, Korn Ferry is one of the largest firms. We have very, very, and I use this word, formidable competitors out there that are doing the exact same thing that we're doing. So you want to have relationships with not only myself, but everybody I'm competing with, because they all win excellent work as well. So that's number one. And then how you prepare for conversations with us. We are not transactional in nature. And David, you know this because we have worked together as, you've been my client. We are consultants and advisors to our client, right? We're on the same side of the table as you, especially at the level we're working at. And so treat us as if we're part of, the client themselves, rather than just somebody who's transacting and trying to find somebody for a placement. We don't look at our work that way, especially at this level. So I would say when you're talking to the recruiter, really understand that they know the client really well. Ask the questions you want to ask about the business, about the company, about the culture. We should have a lot of those answers for you. I think a lot of people know, I didn't know that before I went into search, and I would have recruiters call me and I didn't take the call. And a lot of times it's really pick up the phone, even if you're not interested in moving jobs, and give the recruiter some ideas of people you know in your network. Help the recruiter, right? Because that recruiter will remember that and always try to help you. So when you're going to that first interview with me or whomever, just make sure that you're helping them, they're helping you. It is a symbiotic discussion. And also remember that it's not just this opportunity. If I'm calling you for a CEO search that you might not be interested in, and you give me an idea, thank you for that idea. I will remember that. But guess what? 6 months from now, I might have the CEO search that you're interested in, and I will remember the fact that you've helped me out, and you'll be more front of mind. So it's a long game with your recruiters too, right? Get to know them, build a relationship. We love doing coffees. We love doing lunches. We love spending time. Now, during the world of COVID, we've done a lot of Zooms, but I think we're moving back towards in person. Take the time to get to know us, because the other piece around that, instead of looking at a resume and describing what you've done, if I've started to get to know you as a person, as a leader, as an employee of another company, I understand what you're looking for. I'm able to really represent you to my client in a way that I couldn't do if I just saw you on paper or if we've had one conversation. But it's an investment. It's a two-way investment, is your relationship with recruiters, which you know.
That's definitely true. And I know from my own experience, networking, the recruiter is vitally important. If you want to have a chance to move ahead, you should do that. That's good advice. And you were saying earlier about finding out the situation of the company, finding out details, drilling down into the job description and specification and all that. Being prepared for the interview is really important. I know when I used to interview people as the CEO for the company, it would impress me if the candidate had taken the time to understand the challenges that our company is facing, as well as opportunities that the candidate can identify. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
And so, in terms of preparing for interviews, you talk about with recruiters, definitely build a relationship and network that relationship. That's important. But for a company, preparing for an interview with a company, what suggestions do you have?
Well, if I always say, if they're public, read everything online, read the 10K, understand where they are from a financial perspective. There's so much information out there, right? A little of it depends on how much information is there, but just make sure you're prepared. And sometimes that sounds almost too obvious, but at the level we're recruiting at, a lot of people don't do that. They don't feel they need to do that. And that kind of comes through in the interview process. So if there's information available, please read it, right, online. If you don't feel like you're prepared because it's a private company or it's a company that's gone through a reorg or a bankruptcy, let your recruiter know that, because we're able to sort of flag those concerns or questions you might have with our client before you meet with the client, right? And so definitely understand what you don't know, what you can know, and then know as much as you can, right? When it comes to getting on the phone with who you're meeting with. The other thing I would say is just make sure that they understand sort of your background and your journey when you're telling your story. Read the room or read the Zoom. A lot of times people are long-winded because they want to get everything in, but you really need to start feeling the person on the other side of the Zoom or on the other side of the table to say, maybe I need to pause. Maybe I should ask if I'm giving too much or if I need a little bit less. So it's less about being prepared, but really being thoughtful during the interview. It's not every data point about your background that this person needs to hear, but it's really telling your story in a way that's compelling, concise, and you can tell if it's resonating. Always make sure that what you're saying is resonating with your audience.
So true. Everything we say need to resonate and resonate. Be relevant.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the things that candidate might have done to impress you.
Impress me. Yeah. So, I've had candidates. So number one, so we call it signing off in the industry. So I'm giving away some of our trade secrets. So, please forgive me, other executive recruiters that are listening to this. But when you go through a search process, not everybody gets the job. One person gets the job, and there are 10 people on the short slate, that aren't going to be getting it, right? So we have to tell, and we don't send emails, but we will call candidates that have interviewed with the client, and we will give them bad news often, right? And how a candidate handles themselves during that conversation is so important. I've turned or signed people off, and they have been more than graceful. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, spending time with me. Thank the client. They'll even send a follow-up note and thank me, for the time that we put in. And I will remember that, and I will get another search, and I will make sure that that candidate is called again, right? Because it does talk about maturity, about empathy, all the things that we're looking for in a leader, how you behave during a process. We note that, right? So that's definitely important. And so that's my number one tip for everybody is when we sign you off, please understand that we're in a difficult situation. One person's getting the job. And by the way, we want to call you again because we think you're qualified because we put you in front of our client, right? This one didn't work out. So I would say definitely do that. Thank you notes, I think they go back and forth. I don't receive a ton of thank you notes after interviews, but it's not something I'm expecting from my candidates. I interview all day long. So if I got thank you notes from everybody, I'd have a lot in my inbox. But I think it's perfectly lovely when somebody sends a note to say, thanks for your time today. I think that one can go sort of either way. It's a little bit tougher when it comes to emailing the client if there's a recruiter involved. It's a little bit delicate. Candidates will ask us first, and we will know our client's preference. They do want to get emails, they don't. So ask your recruiter if you can send a thank you note before you do. Because the reason we're hired is so our client can take sort of arm's length removed from the beginning of the process or through some of this interview process, right? Until we get to sort of those final couple of candidates. And so they might not want to be contacted by everybody they're meeting, and that's okay. So just ask your recruiter and we can give you sort of the client's preference for sure.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I especially like you're saying you got to be graceful and be appreciative, even if you didn't get a job, because there's always a next time. That's really good advice.
It's the long game, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it is
absolutely the long game at this level. And the other thing I would say is we as an industry also need to improve, right? Like we're always trying to improve. Sometimes we don't make the call fast enough, or we haven't signed somebody off. I mean, how many times have you read, I got ghosted by my recruiter? That is something that we struggle and deal with. And that's not Korn Ferry, that's just industry wide.
Yeah.
And none of us like doing that. And all of us want to be better. The reality is we're working on a lot of different projects and none of us are perfect, right? And so hopefully people don't mind I'm speaking for all executive recruiters, but we're not doing that on purpose. And we are always trying to do better around signing people off. And by the way, I tell everybody on my team, let's not do it by email. I think we get very reliant on email, and that's a generational thing too, right? And it's pick up the phone. You always want to get the call. And it's a hard conversation. People don't like conflict, but pick up the phone and give respect to your candidate and tell them verbally that they're not moving forward.
That's right. Well, you do it right. Thank you. Let's talk about sharing your experience in executive search. What advice do you have for women and minorities that have high career aspirations?
Absolutely. I think the key is networking. And, there are a lot of different pieces of advice, but what we've seen is we try to work hard enough to get to certain places, and networking sometimes becomes secondary or deprioritized, right? And I can say we because I'm a minority and a woman, so I feel like I have gone through this. If I had known all of these things when I wasn't in recruiting and when I was in banking, I would have done so many things differently, right? In terms of how I spent my time, how I networked, how I really packaged myself as an executive. But I didn't know, and I didn't have that natural network to tell me to do it this way. And so now I'm able to tell minorities and women and diverse candidates, frankly, how to think about creating a natural network, getting out of your comfort zone, going to that coffee that an organization is hosting, even though you have a lot of work to do. You need to take the time out and go to a WCD event here in Chicago. And I'm making that up as an example. Take the time to meet people around you that do what you do. Take the time to get to know people outside of your group at work. Join affiliate groups within your organization where you're meeting and touching people that are outside of your ecosystem where you work and you live. I'm in executive search. I'm in the consumer market group. I could only know those people at Korn Ferry, especially during COVID, right? Those are the people I work with. You need to make it a point to get to know people in different parts of your own organization. They'll also help you think differently about people you need to know in the industry. So networking is absolutely imperative. And some people don't know where to start with that. So I would say if you have a mentor at work, formal or informal, ask. If you have a supervisor at work, ask. If you're still not getting answers, call an executive search firm. Call Korn Ferry, and we can kind of get to know you and put you into our network and get you in touch with people that you should be meeting. So networking is paramount. Join affiliation groups where that resonate with you, right? In your community as well as in your company. I think that's extremely important. And it's almost a second job to do that work because we are busy. You talk to anyone, that's the first word they use, especially during this time. I'm too busy. I'm too busy. It has to be part of your daily routine. Pick 2 people every week that you're going to meet that you don't know in your own organization. And you can always find an excuse, right, to talk to somebody. So networking, that's what I would say.
That's great advice. And I know for me, it's not always the most comfortable thing to do, but I think it's paid great dividends for me. It is something that's an imperative.
Yeah.
You kind of alluded to it, like finding champions and mentors in an organization. How do you go about doing that, and how important is it?
So I think it's critical, absolutely critical. And, we want to see more organizations have formal mentoring programs, right? There's formal and informal. Why formal? Because I think the informal network has always skewed towards less diverse candidates or employees. And so we want to really implement formal mentoring programs. So companies should think about that. Now, if you don't have that and you're seeking mentorship, it's about asking the question, raising your hand, and not being afraid. To your point, David, it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say, I want mentorship or I need this, but you have to be bold in that. The other thing I would say is no one is going to manage your career better than you yourself, right? And so you have to have those uncomfortable conversations. I probably sound like an extrovert. I am not. I'm a little bit more introverted. Going to a networking session where I don't know anybody is probably one of the most terrifying things to this day that I still have to do. I get very, very nervous, but I push myself and I said, I have to do this in order to not only enhance my career, right, but to make sure that the people around me are seeing all the best candidates. I have to go to these events to meet new board members. It is my purpose to make sure that I get to know people that I can put in the boardroom and not just the same people that I've known for 2 years. And it's uncomfortable, but you need to seek it out. HR is a great place if you have a pretty robust HR department, talking to people in the industry, calling mentors. I'm on this Zoom with you right now. Call me. I can help you find somebody to talk to, and I can talk to you about mentorship if you don't have a formal program.
Well, that's kind of you. Your phone is going to ring off the hook. Thank you for offering that. Let's talk about taking calculated risks. Have you taken risk along your journey, and what do you think about risk taking? How important is it?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think if you play it safe, you're never going to know what you don't know. You have to be prudent, but calculated risk is, I'm a banker, so I'm always thinking risk reward, right? And you absolutely have to take risk in your career. I think for me, taking the Chicago job was the biggest risk I took. We had a phenomenal partner running our office. He decided he wanted to step down after 17 years of doing it. Yeah. And post-COVID world, I don't even know what office means. I don't think anyone does, right? But a couple of reasons when I was asked to step into the role that I did it. One, it was a risk, but it was calculated. And I thought, it gives me a seat at the table in order to affect change that I want to affect in my own organization. But two, who am I to say no to something like that as a minority woman when we have a lot of minority women looking up to say, who at Korn Ferry have those seats? For me to turn it down and then not be visible, I'm not doing a service to the next generation. So I felt it was a big responsibility that I needed to take for the diverse population within my own organization. So yeah, I think calculated risk is imperative, but get advice. Have not only your mentors, but your confidants, right? People you really trust in the industry that will tell it to you straight. Is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? And I always call that my personal board of directors. Whoever that is for you, you can have as many board members as you want, but have those people surrounding you that have your best interests, and make sure you are able to lean on them and ask them questions when you're taking risks.
One last question, and that relates to mental attitude. Tell me what it takes to be successful in terms of mental attitude.
So I think it goes back to having an openness, being empathetic, understanding differences, and being able to pivot. I really do. And I don't want to say be an optimist, because I think I don't want to be too Pollyannic about it, right? But I do think it's seeing the good before you see the bad, right? I think a healthy dose of pessimism or skepticism is important, but you have to lean in to really understanding that people are trying to do good in your organization, right? People just are different and they have differences. So try to put yourself in people's shoes. And that goes right back into the empathy and agility around leadership. I think that's what it takes today. I don't think it was necessarily true 100 years ago, but today, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Well, thank you so much for your time. We've taken up a lot of your time, been so gracious with it, and I really appreciate your very insightful advice. I think the audience will find it most beneficial. Thanks so much for doing this, Radhika.
Thank you, David. And just for the audience to know, you are one of my mentors. So I was thrilled that I was able to join you. So thank you very much.
It's so good to see you.
You too.
Thank you. You
Take
good
care.
care. Okay, bye.
Bye.